I get too wrinkly with the smile now.
Same.
Yeah,
I'll recommend an eye cream at the end of our session,
Perfect.
that's my girlfriend takes good care of the cream department around here, the face
I love it.
cream and
A
yeah.
good La Mer moment. Well, welcome everyone to our segment today. My name is Elisha and I work at Owner. Today we're joined by Nick and Daniel from the Canadian Real Estate Investor Podcast. You two, please let our audience know who you are and describe your business and what you do.
Sure. We run a podcast, which is relatively self-explanatory. I think it's Canada's #1 real estate podcast, and it's focused on delivering timely and valuable content to real estate investors primarily.
Yeah, and then just to build on that, from the podcast, we've been able to kind of branch out and start several other kind of smaller early businesses, early stage businesses at this point, from merch to meetups, a course that we're working on as well. So the podcast has really kind of just been the foundation for a lot of these other businesses to grow from.
Wow, that's honestly an incredible jumping off point. And to let our audience know, today we're just going to be diving in and discussing how Nick and Daniel started their business and launched a successful podcast. And I personally am very interested in learning all things because before we started our stream, I was very honest and said I've been borderline stalking them, listening to their podcast, what they've been up to. And so I'm really excited to just dive right in. So I'd love to know, why did you two start this business?
Take it away, Dan. Because to give Dan credit where credit's due, Dan had actually had a podcast going for probably, I don't know, the better part of 6 months to a year before I hopped on and started helping him with that one, and then the next step was this podcast. So yeah, Dan, take us back.
Yeah. I originally started it not even as a business, but as I think a lot of real estate professionals are told to start podcasts or start doing content on social media as realtors or mortgage professionals to promote their business. And so that's really why I started making content, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when I wasn't able to show properties. I wasn't able to do traditional marketing channels like door knocking or cold calling. And so I started, trying to deliver valuable information to consumers. And I used sort of the concept of COVID as sort of a jumping off point, just talking to people, getting an understanding for what was happening in their industry as a result of that. And then gradually, I think halfway through the pandemic lockdown periods, like Nick had messaged me and said, "Oh, hey, I really like what you're doing." We just kind of connected, and he started helping me with content as well as some other things around the business. And then the content side of things was really ramping up for me, and we got noticed by a national network called the Canadian Investor Podcast, and they brought us on as hosts of their spin-off show, which was a highly requested show that all of their audience wanted them to do more specifically on real estate. So I guess it was really, we're fortunate in that respect that our business was already market validated. Like we had a small following on the existing podcast, and then we had this other business basically reach out to us to collaborate. I think that's kind of why. It was really just filling a market demand that hadn't really been filled in a meaningful way. I think the real estate industry has a lot of podcasts. I think people might laugh when I mention real estate and podcasts. It seems like every realtor has one, and there was this tweet that came out the other day. It was like, what is it? Nobody's pumping out Instagram content like high school acquaintances turned realtors. But we managed to get really lucky with it becoming Canada's #1 podcast or real estate podcast. Sorry.
Congrats on that. Honestly,
Thank
that
you,
is not a small feat. A lot of people don't realize because I make content for Owner itself, and a lot of people do not realize the work that goes into showing up every day for your audience, showing up every hour, sometimes just answering the DMs, the comments, sending the links all the way over to coming together and forming ideas. Like, this is really cool. And kind of leads into my next question, which is, what are some of the challenges or roadblocks that you faced while both of you have been kind of starting this business, and how did you overcome them, even potentially through the partnership that you found?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny, right? You said it. Like content's one of those things that's so sexy these days. Right? Oh, all this person has to do is stand in front of a camera and say this or point at that or dance or whatever it may be, whatever platform you're using, whatever kind of content you're producing. But it really is challenging, right? Dan and I have kind of always had a quality over quantity type of attitude, while still trying to push out as much quality content as possible. I mean, some of the challenges are what you would expect, right? Like, how do you consistently come up with good ideas? And then when you have a good idea, how do you execute that? And when you figure out how to execute it, how do you put it in a 30-second to 2-minute format that isn't going to lose everyone's attention? And then once that happens and you get it out and something that you're really proud of, or you think you did a good job on, kind of flops, it's easy to get discouraged. And then something that you spent, 2 seconds making versus the stuff that you worked a while on goes viral. So it's a fickle beast. I think, the main challenges are just getting your reps in, right? Like you have to be putting stuff out. With social media, you don't have to be as regimented on a schedule. It definitely helps. With the podcast, that's something we committed to early on, was we're going to do 2 episodes a week, released Tuesday and Friday morning, every Tuesday and Friday morning at 5 a.m. And we have not missed an episode. And I'll tell you, it has not always been easy. I have had to rent a hotel room to do it. Dan has had to travel for it because he's lost power. We've done it on vacations. Dan literally was about to do one in his car earlier today. We don't miss a beat. And, the more you treat it like a business, the more it'll become a business.
I don't have much to add there, for sure. It was great. Well said.
Yes, I definitely agree, especially around the content production point, and being creators, but creators within your own niche. I think that there's such an advantage, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit later on. A lot of people don't realize there's such an advantage to niching out as far as you can, because you're not just focused on real estate as a general topic. It's Canadian real estate even further, and then investment in that real estate too. So I know we're going to dive into that a little bit further, but I just find that very interesting. So I'd love to know if you two could tell me something interesting or surprising as you've been building out in this entrepreneurial journey so far, especially since there was already that real estate background, that entrepreneurial thinking. What was different about shifting into content creation?
I think the part that surprised me the most about the entire thing was the amount of support and collaboration that takes place in the space. I mean, I'm admittedly pretty cynical when it comes to the real estate profession and my industry. And I had almost been an outsider prior to starting this journey. And I kind of just thought that would, people would know that. And so they would maybe just not wanted to do stuff with me. But the amount of people that have just taken an interest in what we're doing, wanted to help us and support us and grow on the journey, it was really fascinating from my perspective. And that's not just I just think I underestimated the kindness and compassion and collaboration that exists in the world. And that's actually been pretty surprising from my perspective on the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think, Dan and I talk about it all the time now that we're just surrounded by so many good people that have essentially just, theoretically appeared out of thin air in the last little while, but that's not the case, right? I mean, inputs and outputs, right? We've been putting a lot of good out there with little expectations, right? I mean, we were doing the podcast when we were getting no views and not making any money off of it and not getting any recognition, right? We did it back then for almost a year. So to switch over and keep doing it and see the what happened and what is continually happening has it's just been a huge blessing. But it does come with a lot of work as well, right? And I think we've put the work in, and now we're reaping some of the rewards for a long time, in a sense of working for free, working under the radar, and that does come back to pay dividends at some point.
That's so true, and I think a lot of people forget that on average, a lot of businesses don't start to break even or make a certain amount of money until sometimes a few years. And the same goes for content production. That's even the case for some content creators for years and years as they've been building, or they finally find their niche, or it takes them some time to actually find their sweet spot. So congratulations on being able to do that within a year's time. Like, some people might think, oh my gosh, that's so long. But in my opinion, after seeing what I've seen, that is a pretty good amount of time to link up with the right network, collaborate and coordinate with the right people. It's great.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. It took so long. Even I think the podcast was actually, and the opportunity that arose for the podcast was actually like a culmination of years of work on both Nick and I's part of other content. And so I would completely agree. Starting from zero is like one of the hardest things to do on social media, and so many people want to give up, but it's very much like working out, like Nick said at the beginning, like getting the reps in. It's just like, a lot of people don't want to go back after they don't see results in a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, just to add to that, Dan, when Dan and I first met, one of the first things we connected on was the fact that we had started and had mild success and failure and mild failure in other businesses. Right. And I think that's one of the things that led us to be confident in ourselves and one another. Like, yeah, we've produced content before, we've been on TV before, we've done interviews before, both being interviewed and interviewing people. Like, none of this was foreign to us. It was all just, okay, how do we apply it to this new thing, and how do we apply it together? And then, being able to learn from years and years of that stuff. It's just that classic thing, right? The overnight success that took 10 years, right? People that didn't know what we've done, starting businesses a decade ago, see us now and like, okay, well, how did that happen? Well, it's the culmination of literally a decade or more of grinding for both of us.
So true. And I think as well, in the world of content creation, a lot of people don't realize your initial audience is going to be your friends. It's going to be your families. It's going to be like,
and I hate to say it, but usually, and this isn't just me, this is a lot, it's a lot of the time, it's really sad. And I want to call my friends out and everyone else's friends that aren't supporting them. Yeah. You'll have people, you'll have randoms on Instagram or whatever platform you're using. You'll have random people support you more than like your good friends will. Your good friends usually, in my experience, and my good friends probably won't even watch this, some of my old good friends anyways, but like a lot of people will look at you doing something and be like, okay, what's this guy doing? Okay, he's getting 25 views, and then 2 years later, be like, okay, he's growing a little bit, and then 5 years from now, they'll be asking you how to do it, or I trusted you all along, I know you could do it, kind of thing. So it's just that, again, it's that fickle thing. You've got to get over what the people that should be loving and supporting you from day one, they usually won't, unfortunately. Outside of our mothers, maybe. A lot of your friends won't. They'll question it and they'll be like, why are you wasting your time? What do you think you're doing, kind of thing. So don't ever let that get in the way.
Very true. I remember I had to tell my mom to calm down sometimes with the Instagram comments. Okay, I think people know. They know you love me.
Yeah.
So very true. Well, that kind of segues into our next point, because we kind of talked about the peaks, the valleys. I'd love to know what so far has been the most rewarding part of being an entrepreneur on this journey.
I honestly do think the community that we built and the support, I think one of the phenomena that Nick described is you don't get a support from a lot of your older friends, but I think you create a lot of new ones along the way. I think that's been probably the most rewarding part, is the people that we've met, the support that we've got, the community that we built as a result of it. And I think that probably exists for most entrepreneurs, is the community that you build around your business.
Yeah, I literally don't have anything to add to it. That is the perfect thing. And the great thing is the community just keeps growing. It's all like-minded people that are, out there trying to grow their own businesses. And I feel very, very blessed to be able to help those people, and they help us in more ways than they know as well. So yeah, 100% just the community we've built. And I feel like we're very early days for that.
So true. And a little bit of a self-serving question, but I'd love to know, how has Owner assisted you on your business journey?
Yeah, I think that there's two layers to that. So number one is, I think that I believe in the concept of specialization and division of labor, which is sort of a principle of an economy, and that we shouldn't be doing things that we're not good at. So I'm not good at starting corporations at all. I'm very, very bad at it actually. And I'm not good at sort of like I guess what we're seeing kind of like the automated minute books and management of said corporation. So being able to offload that task onto owner has been a huge help. And then the other thing is, I mean, to be a real estate investor, which is what we do on the podcast, we have to start corporations for every single property that we create. And that's, a nuanced but big part of a business is starting, or big part of the real estate investing journey is starting a holdco for every single property. And so actually streamlining that process and turning it into something and allowing us to share that with our listeners as something that's a way to create efficiency in their real estate investing journey has been huge for us.
Yeah, I think I'd leave it there.
Awesome. I love hearing that, especially around building corporations and needing to do that per property. I think a lot of people get very wide-eyed and excited around real estate investments, but I love when YouTubers kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the process. There's this one YouTuber who I'm following right now. She's invested in her first property and she didn't get two inspectors. She didn't do all of the things that a lot of people are told to do along the way. She's a bit stubborn about. And she's just giving the real side of everything. And that also includes eventually down the road, if she wants to make this property an investment property in the future, she's going to have to register that business and she'll be sharing that journey. So I love that you two are really honest about that too, because a lot of people think, yeah, I got this little lump sum of money. I'm going to invest it. I'm going to do the XYZ with it. But there's a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of lawyers you got to talk to and a lot of additional money you have to spend on top of that investment. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, maybe I will add to it. I think, a lot of our audience, and we've started to tailor some more episodes to this, right? I mean, we have a really broad audience from high level developers and investment bankers and stuff, people that truthfully we didn't expect to be listeners. It's always an amazing and very pleasant surprise. But a lot of the audience are people like I was 10 years ago. People like Dan was, or maybe you were, Alicia, like 10 years ago, where it's like, I want to start a business. I have an idea, but like same thing with content, right? I've got this idea, but how do I actually execute it? How do I go about buying this first property? Well, so two things. That's kind of one direction we've taken with the podcast, whereas we've really decided to go almost like a real estate school. Like if you listen to the podcast from start to finish, all 100 and whatever episodes now, a lot of those will be evergreen content that will teach you the fundamentals and the principles of real estate investing, fixed versus variable mortgage, how to buy a portfolio, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of our listeners are business people or want to be business people, whether it's I want to buy a duplex and rent it out, or I want to be an Airbnb person, or I've got an idea for a prop tech company or whatever that is. And all of those people need owner. All of those people, whether it's a corp or a sole proprietorship or whatever. I mean, I used to do it, way back. I'd go on the government website, and if anyone's ever been on the CRA, well, this is basically the same website, the same interface, but you're just trying to set up a corp, and it's not user friendly. It's not we like to try to implement as many tech pieces into our business. We preach this in real estate investing, but also just in business in general. Systems are your friend, and they're the best way to scale. And we're also big on the principle of who, not how. And if we can dish out all of these responsibilities to a wonderful tech platform that's going to handle it for us, why wouldn't we?
That is so important. It's so funny, Nick, because you literally answered my next question already, which was if you could go back in time and give yourself some advice before you started, what would it be? And I feel like that really encapsulates it. But Daniel, do you have anything to kind of add on? If you could literally hop in a time machine right now and like shake 10 years ago, Daniel, what would you say to him?
I would just say to not be afraid of what people are going to say. Like earlier, it's a skill that I wish or not a skill, just a decision, I think, that I wish I made a lot earlier. Yeah.
I definitely understand that because I was a music theater kid. I have no shame. That doesn't exist in me. I was like Glee before Glee was cool. So my shame bug is out the window, but
Yeah.
I definitely understand, because it really is a muscle that you do have to build to kind of just say, I don't see the snide comments, or I don't hear them anymore. I can just kind of breeze and walk past, or you can see your future self more
Yeah.
than you can hear the comments that people have to say or the ideas people have of what you should be doing.
Yeah, well said.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, I'd love to kind of understand and know for both of you, because we've talked about how difficult a lot of the work that you're doing is, especially because you're wearing so many hats, because you are real estate investors, you are creating all of this content, you have this podcast, you like are working with so many different umbrellas, a lot of different things. What motivates you to keep going?
I think it's like become an obligation at this point, to be honest. Like, I think it's just like when you have an audience and coworkers, and it's this embedded accountability system. Like, there are a lot of the fact that I love doing it is probably the right answer to the question. And I think that I would encourage people to try and cultivate a passion for what you do in life, not wait for it, because a lot of people feel entitled to finding a job that they love, and you don't just find it, you actually have to work towards it. I think that's it, but I do think that there's an embedded kind of sense of accountability to keep delivering to the audience and to business partners, et cetera. So those would be my answers.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're passionate about something, but also when you're in the midst of building something that is yours, and just as Dan said, that it's not even just ours anymore, right? It's almost we're building it with so many partners and for so many people. There's definitely that element of obligation. I don't even know what else I'd be doing without this. I'd be in a different industry trying to do the same stuff, because like I just love this. I think I've got an inherent drive to start business. I mean, if you've listened to any of the other interviews, I've got a bad joke that I wanted to, growing up, I wanted to be either a talk show host or a race car driver. I drive a Hyundai Elantra hybrid, so one of them is not working out, and the other one seems to be working out. So I mean, I think Dan and I, it's that life by design as well. I like to be able to, we do work a lot, but I like to be able to be in control of my time and my life, and more so than anything, probably the direction that my life is going.
That is so important. And I think as well, you can see the raw results of what you're doing a lot faster than if you were working for kind of that bigger conglomerate or corporation, and you can shift and change. Like, the work you do is a lot more malleable. So I do find that exciting. But I think one thing to add on, because I'm an entrepreneur as well, and I think one of the biggest things that helps me, that both of you have mentioned multiple times, are the systems. Because this one YouTuber who I followed, she's great, and she's focused on fitness, but she has a lot of barriers in her life, like PCOS, etc., that kind of stop her from seeing the results that she'd wanted for a long time. And she talked, people say, how do you stay motivated? You wake up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., whatever, you get your workouts done, you eat a certain way. How do you stay motivated? She said, it is not even about this fire inside of her, because that dims out day in, day out. She has the peaks, she has the valleys. She said she just has a system. Her body knows to wake up at that time. She does it every day. She knows that she has a certain workout to do because it's Tuesday. She knows like what her smoothie is because she put it in the baggie the night before in the freezer. Like, she has all of these systems. And I think, especially for me, that helps keep me going, as well as somebody who's not naturally very motivated. I'm a butterfly catcher. I am a musical theater kid. I'm not really big on numbers, but I love systems. Like a project manager by trade. So for me, I love making a system. I love building a calendar. My poor marketing team, they experience that for me all the time. But I find that those systems really pump me up and prop me up when motivation and determination fail me as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, you said it right there, right? Peaks and valleys. I mean, Dan and I will tell you, there's some days we call each other and it's a bad day, or it's been a bad couple days, kind of thing, right? Deals have fallen through, numbers are down, you name it, it's happened, and it will continue to. But there's other days where we call each other and we're on top of the world because we've just closed a couple of big deals, or bought more properties, or we've had the biggest podcast day yet, or whatever. And if you're riding that emotional roller coaster, which it is, and you get too ingrained in it sometimes, and that happens. It happens to me. It happens to all of our partners. I think it happens to every entrepreneur. But you're right. If you have those systems in place, and you have that, and I think you also have that kind of the bigger picture for the greater good, or whatever it is, right? That goal, or those goals that you're working towards. It's just a constant reminder to keep pushing.
Yeah, amazing. I definitely agree. Well, we're going to shift gears a little bit and kind of talk a bit more about entrepreneurship in a moment, but I want to lean a little bit further into your expertise and ask, do you have any advice for someone trying to get into the housing market right now, like today?
Be patient. Good deals are made, not found. That's about it.
Listen to the podcast. What are you doing? Come on.
Agreed. I definitely agree with that one. And I like that idea.
Yeah, no, but on a serious note, I mean, like, we did design the podcast with that in mind, right? As I said before, it is more real estate school than, again, we've had let's call it 105 episodes, and we've had 8 guests on, right? And those are subject matter experts, lawyers, accountants, billionaires, etc. So we really are out there trying to teach people honestly the do's and don'ts, the rights and wrongs, and to try to get over the sometimes classic industry talk of, get into the market as fast as possible. It's always the right time to buy. Real estate market never goes down, and all that nonsense. So yeah, I think patience and making sure you have the right people around you. That's probably the fastest way to get into a bad deal, is if you're getting bad advice.
That is so true, especially around having the right people around you, because I have a good friend, and pretty much all of her, and I live in Vancouver right now too, and she grew up here. Pretty much all of her friends have purchased properties. She already owns an investment property, but she's renting at this point. But that is just the world she lives in. Like, most of her friends have purchased. She knows like who she could talk to for different pieces of advice, etc. So if you want to purchase a home as well, or invest within that, I think surrounding yourself with other people who have done the same and gone through the process, have worked with the right inspectors, are some of the best people to talk to, because they'll also give you the reality check about purchasing a house. It's like I said, that YouTuber, she went right into it, like wide-eyed, so excited. She's like, I'm gonna buy this house in Texas, I'm gonna do all of these things. And her mother-in-law said, make sure you get a second inspector. Like, her husband said, maybe right now isn't the right time. And she just kind of bulldozed straight through it. And now she's dealing with a lot of things, but because she's sharing her journey as well, people are able to take in that content and say, okay, right now actually is the right time for me, but I'll make sure that I follow these steps she may not have as well. So I think the content and the right people as well who can give you that reality check. Because my cousins have owned multiple properties, and I know that when I'm ready, I'll reach out to them and say, what's going on here? You've owned a lot of new builds. How has that worked out for you? What are the builders that I think are best?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll get a little bit into our data survey that we recently released. We try to produce about 2 of them per year to just understand the market of entrepreneurship. And recently, our survey actually showed that a lot of entrepreneurs are optimistic about the future of their small businesses. Do you two share the same outlook as well? Are you kind of in that peak area? Are you in that valley area? We'd love to kind of know where you're feeling at this point.
I think we're in that escape velocity, and the thing about being a rocket ship and trying to make it to space is that you burn a ton of fuel doing it, right? So I think that there's a high ROI on the energy that we're putting into the business right now, and there's a high chance that we can get to a good trajectory as a result of it. But I'm not super optimistic on not to say anything against the business, but I just think the economy probably is due to see some headwinds that will materialize in any business, no matter what. I mean, for us, it could be that advertisers are spending less money on advertising on the show. It could be that people are less likely to spend money on a course because they're whatever they call it, tightening their belt buckles, or the self-imposed austerity measures that a recession can impose on individuals. People just aren't, maybe I think that the real estate industry is full of a lot of fear right now. The idea of real estate investing is, and that guides a lot of people to our content. But I think, if you end up seeing a cycle play out the way it could or did in the 90s, you get a lot more and more people just giving up on the idea of owning real estate or investing in real estate. And so I think that, we're super optimistic about the business. We're super optimistic about the industry, but I don't want to be completely unrealistic and say that it's all sunshine and rainbows, because it's probably not for the next little bit. I'd say the next 12 months are probably going to be our hardest and most important.
Yeah, I'd agree, and this is coming from an eternal optimist here, almost to fault sometimes, but it keeps me going. I mean, look, I've been extremely optimistic about every other business I've had as well, right? The last product I was selling, I was like, we're gonna hit $1 million, and we didn't get anywhere close, right? We did well, but we drastically failed if that was the measure of success that I put on the business. But I think it's about two things. One, I think optimism is extremely important. If you're not optimistic about your business, then maybe it's time to pivot or leave and shut it down and find something that you are optimistic about. Because if you're not optimistic about it, how the hell are you supposed to get up and do it every day? And I think the other thing is being real, right? Being a realist. And if there's an optimist, it's me, and a realist, it's Dan. And I think that's why we've got a really good relationship and partnership, because I'll be like, we're gonna hit this number or whatever, and he's like, well, we might, but like this could happen, and half the time he's right and half the time I'm right, and when I'm right, it's great, and when he's right, it's great as well, because I've my expectations have been brought back down to reality. So I think realism and being self-aware of all that is extremely important for entrepreneurs, because with entrepreneurs, I think a lot of people find themselves in a bit of an echo chamber, right? You're so into your business, you're so into your product, the content, whatever it is you're doing, that sometimes you can't see the forest through the trees, right? You're just so deep into it. Other people don't understand. You can't talk to other people about it. So sometimes being able to take a step back and having to look at things, like Dan said, the broader economy, which will affect everyone. And that's not a measure of success or failure in your business, possibly. So, yeah, I mean, optimism is a must, but I think realism and self-awareness are musts as well.
That's so important. And I definitely can agree. And of course, as well, with real estate, like the rest of the economy, we run on cycles as well too, and a lot of people don't talk about that. So I think it is important to recognize and see what's happening now. Some people take advantage of being in the valley of the cycle, which we saw during the pandemic. A lot of people lost a lot of people gained a lot as well too, and it kind of depends on which side of the coin that you're on or where you see opportunities, for sure. As well, leaning into, in spite of kind of understanding and knowing where the economy is heading over the next 12 months, your podcast really has seen immense growth over the past year, becoming one of the biggest business podcasts in Canada. And you hinted a little bit as to why you two have been able to find success around your community or around as well the subject matter. But I'd love to know from both of you, what is it about the Canadian real estate podcast that really just resonates with its listeners?
I think we're an outlier in the real estate podcasting space, in such that it's not interview style, and it's not that I have anything against that style of podcast. It's actually the type of podcast that I prefer to listen to, is interview style. But I just think that it's almost like formatted like a true crime podcast, where there's two hosts exploring an issue completely end to end. And I just think that was something very unique to the industry. And that was a format that we got from the Canadian Investor podcast, our podfathers, we call them, but the network heads. And I think that's, to be honest, a big distinguishing difference that became our competitive advantage. And we've seen other people try and compete with the same kind of strategy since, which is fine. Like, we welcome competition in the space. That's what makes capitalism great. But they haven't really had the same success. I think it was the right strategy at the right time in the right place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a few other little things we've done. Is I think Dan and I have probably spoken to over the last year hundreds of people, hundreds and hundreds each. Every single person that reaches out to us on the podcast, we give them the time of day. We speak to them. We answer their questions. Every single person that emails us gets a response with one simple, we're giving away free advice and working for free all the time, with the one request as to, hey, please go share this with a friend or like it or write a review, kind of thing, right? Very, very simple things for people to do. And yeah, outside of that, niching down a little bit, as Alicia brought up earlier, right? It's like, if we just had the real estate podcast or whatever, it might not be as good, right? And that's something that we got from, as Dan endearingly calls them our podfathers, who were like, you guys gotta niche down, right? So we even were, there's episodes that we've thought about, or guests that we've had, like, opportunities, like fairly famous people that we were just like, they're not real estate related, right? They don't have anything to add to this. So really staying true to that. But again, it really does come back down to the content. We've grown with the help of our network and the help of our already existing platforms and social media followings, but it's the content that, I mean, we, even still to this day, we're over 100 episodes in, and if we aren't feeling good about an episode, if we don't like it, if it's not perfect, we'll literally go back and redo it. Doesn't happen as often as it used to. We used to do that quite a bit. I think the worst we've ever done was 3 or 4 takes on like the first or second one, Dan.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're just so dedicated to putting out really, really good content that that I think that's been, something that people have come to expect of us, and something that people are now okay with recommending, right? You don't want to recommend something to someone, to another professional, to someone that you hold in a high regard if it's not solid stuff. And I think we've been able to consistently produce solid stuff through an immense workload. But yeah, that's definitely a reason.
That's so true. There's so many different nuggets that I love that you shared, especially around creating what your audience wants and not what you want. That is the absolute biggie that a lot of content creators very kindly need to kind of drop their ego a bit and say, okay, I think XYZ is going to work, but my audience actually wants ABC, and I need to lean into ABC, especially if there's still that passionate intersection as well. If you're passionate about it and your audience wants it, lean right into that. If you can, experiment and have fun with it, but kind of follow that 80-20 rule of like 80% what works, what the audience is interested in, and 20% experimental, having fun with it. I think that those are important, but also the fact that you mentioned that you're creating shareable content, but that the audience can always trust if they share it with a friend that they're going to really enjoy it and that their friends are going to enjoy it. On social, when I create content, the biggest metrics I look at aren't likes or comments. It's always shares and saves. And those are more private metrics that I look at for success. But when I see that a certain amount of people are saving it in comparison to those who are watching it, I'm like, we've hit a gold mine. We've hit a place where people are going to return back to this content. Or if they're sharing it with their friends, they either find it really funny or so useful that they know somebody's going to enjoy it. I'm like, okay, this is where we lean into. This is where we stream into, more than if someone comments on it or more than if somebody likes it. Because that's an easy thing to just double tap, keep swiping. But if somebody sits there, likes it, shares it, types in somebody else's name, I feel like that's a lot more work that shows that you've hit the right track.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And, that's something that early on, Dan and I made an effort to do with the podcast and with all forms of content, is what we call social currency, right? Give people something that they can go and look good by telling someone else, or by sharing a video. They are now the first ones to have this information. And if we're the ones providing it, whether on the podcast or Instagram or TikTok or whatever it may be, you're 100% right. To double tap on whatever doesn't even mean they watched it, but to actually take the time to share it on any of the social platforms is huge. And then especially with a podcast, which is long form content, right? We're talking 40 to 45 minutes, not 30 to 30 seconds to 2 minutes. It's a massive show of respect from people that actually share it. And again, we want to give people good things to share.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think as well too, this is a set question specifically for Daniel, but I know, Nick, you kind of touched on some of the hills and valleys you've experienced as an entrepreneur for other businesses you've had. But Dan, you mentioned previously that before the success you're seeing now, you had some difficulties and difficult experiences when you're getting some businesses off the ground. Do you mind kind of sharing some of those experiences and how you found the motivation to move on to your next project like this one without feeling defeated?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I don't really know. I think I just kept going, like it was, and kept trying. And I think I sort of realized that, when, and it wasn't having like this, like faith in an idea like fate or like predetermined, like that the right thing would happen. But it was just that, I think there's this, even if you just think about it from a biological perspective, like the thing that you're most well suited for, you're going to do the best at. Naval Ravikant talks about this a lot on Twitter, and there's a great summary of all of his tweets called the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. But he talks about like how if you're doing a task that you're the most well-suited person to, or you're going to get the most dopamine from it, as an example. And it just took me a really long time to find what that was. Some people spend their entire life searching for that, or they settle and choose a career that they hate. And I just was never gonna have that. And so in the most cases, I failed at something because I was the wrong person to do it, or I didn't love it enough. And I just kept going until I found something that I was the right person to do. And coincidentally, I liked that a lot at the same time. And there's probably a reason that you like things that you're the right person for as well. But I think that's really it. It was just knowing that there was something better out there, and having a willingness to keep trying until I found it.
Yeah, Dan's humble. He's also got more grit and perseverance and more hardworking than most people I've ever met. So I'm sure all that's true, but also those things.
I love that. That is so important. And before we continue on with our final questions, I wanted to just remind everyone, as they are listening, watching, commenting, and sharing this with others, be sure to follow us here at Owner and subscribe wherever you're watching to get more content like this, to learn how to grow and start your business. And at the end as well, Dan and Nick will plug their own podcasts and where to find them as well on social. But just wanted to remind all of you, if you're enjoying this, you can get a lot more. So moving on to our next question here, I'd love to kind of tap into this idea of starting. Right? A lot of people can be super intimidating with like speaking into a microphone on a podcast, but both of you do that on a regular basis. You're doing it now already, right? And did either of you have any media training beforehand? Is this kind of just all natural? You leaned into it and it happened. What was that process like for you?
I was fortunate enough to have some training through like different things growing up, but I don't actually know if it helped all that much. Like I'd say like my content, I actually don't really find myself all that exciting to listen to. But I think that I just found the right thing to talk about that was right for my style. I mean, I remember there was periods of time when I was trying to make content that was really like realtor-y and, like very high energy and whatever. And I was like, this is just not me. Right. And so I kept going until I found content that was me. And I talk about stuff that's not actually all that exciting. It's like scary and boring for the most part, but people like that. And like and it goes well with my oratory style, I suppose. So I don't really know if it would have helped us at all to have a lot of training. I think a big part of it just comes down to those reps that Nick was talking about. It's like, I've recorded thousands of hours of me speaking. So eventually you're going to get okay at it.
Yeah, I mean, no formal training for me either. Again, it just goes back to, I've been starting businesses and trying to do this type of stuff for well over a decade. Right? I'm 33 now. The first business I started it with any, real success was when I was 21, and that landed me on TV, and that landed me in pitching tourism boards and all these other random things that weren't normal, right? And I probably sucked at it back then, and I still suck on some days today. But again, it's just, you do it enough times, and I think if you're ingesting enough great information and listening to, I consume a ton of podcasts as well, and I'm always trying to, and I know Dan is as well, always trying to improve my own knowledge, my own speaking patterns, the way that I tell a story, the way that I convey information, the way that I communicate. So no training, probably could use some. By no means am I close to perfect now, and probably will never be, but it's always just about being improving. And I think it's just about, to add to what Dan said, is just finding what you're good at. And if you're not true to yourself and you're kind of forcing yourself to do something, it should be pretty obvious to you. And if it's not, that's unfortunate, because it's likely pretty obvious to other people pretty quickly.
That's so true. I think a consistent thread throughout our entire conversation, even as we're like winding down to the last few questions, is showing up and consistency. Those are the big ones. People hear it all the time, but it's because it works, and it's so true. Like you two, you've been grinding, you've been hitting the pavement, and hitting the mics really all the time, and it shows, and that really does come through. But like Dan, I love that you touched on the fact that maybe in the past you might have made like cheesy realtor videos or content that just did not match or fit your own personality or lean into it, but you found what works. And it's so true. Like you have like a very stoic tone, but I would believe you if you said, legally you should do XYZ. Somebody got on there and they were very like Bob Barkery, like, you could get sued. I would not get into it. Right. But yeah, if you bring a more serious tone to it, people will trust and believe and understand that. And everybody kind of has their place. So this is a really kind of great and important point, because within entrepreneurship, networking is huge. It is very true that it's not what you know, it's who you know. And in one episode that you recorded, you spoke about and you shared numerous times on like how to network. But one of the biggest tips that really stood out to us here at Owner that you mentioned is that it really is about quality over quantity. We're not throwing business cards out into the wind anymore. Like, do you two have any advice on how to recognize like quality for people new to networking and attending different events, especially in the real estate world?
I think a big thing is just like seeing the genuine connection and just talking. Like it's about going deep and not wide. Like a lot of people, if you're sitting there, if you're at a networking event and you're sitting there talking to somebody and you're both you could spend your entire night having that conversation. You don't have to go and talk to anyone else, right? Like that finding those important connections is why you're there. And so I think that, for most, it's a sort of basics social skill, but it's, realizing whether or not you're captivated in a conversation, if the other person is as well, to me is really the good way to identify the quality, because it's super subjective, right? Like it's based on what you're interested in and whether or not the other person is interested in what you have to say. And as long as you have one of those things where both people are getting value and creating value for one another, then like that's really the objective. You don't need to go find 10 of those. Or 10 shallow conversations if you can find one or two really strong ones.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you go and talk to two people and you network with intention, and you've likely made a contact for life or for at least several years. Or you can go and talk to 25 people, have 25 follow-up emails to send, not really make a lasting impression on any of them, and possibly piss some people off because they just see you talking to the next person in the next group and talking to the next person in the next group and so on and so forth. And it's usually just not a good look. And, it just really goes back to being genuine and being self-aware, self-aware in the sense of, if you're newer to whatever industry you are, real estate or whatever, and you're at a networking event, go and listen. The only time you should be speaking is when you're asking the right questions, and be sure that they are the right questions. Or if you're in a different position, go there ready to answer questions for the right people. So I think it is more of an art than a lot of people give it, because networking for some people just means get out, drink, and talk to as many people as possible, when in reality it's very different.
That is so true. Especially, I completely agree with the quality over quantity point, because like my side biz, or one of them, is I'm a meditation teacher, and I was able to network, and I probably received about 5 or 6 clients from one contact alone. And that was definitely the case along my journey, is like somebody who I followed previously recommended me to somebody else. That was another contact within that. But those are relationships I cultivated for years and did not expect anything from. But because I was just my genuine self the entire time. That's also how I've received 9-to-5 jobs as well too, but never from having that deeper expectation from people too. I think being genuine as well, people can sniff that out very easily, especially in sales focused industries too. And I think that that's also another big thing to bring, is just yourself however you are, and as genuinely as you can be in those situations, because everyone's out to get something, especially from higher ups or people who are working in certain areas, and they can sniff that out immediately. So
yeah, I had someone a long time ago tell me, at all costs avoid commission breath. And that has always resonated with me because I've been in and out of sales and have my own businesses for a decade now, and that is so freaking true. It's unbelievable, right? You've gotta present yourself, because again, that first impression, if you're going in there and you're firing off business cards and you're just like, buy this, sell that, we do this. Again, not only do people not remember you, they might remember you and not like you.
Very true. And avoid you. Avoid your emails.
Exactly.
That's so true. Anytime that I've been salesy, those are not the best relationships, but the times where I crack a sarcastic joke and then we end up talking, then we share canapes or we kind of joke about the canapes, those are kind of the best relationships I've cultivated in networking settings or at seminars or things like that. So that's very true. So this one I'm personally very curious about, as you kind of spoke about, of course, the projection for the next 12 months, where we're seeing the economy, where we're seeing the real estate industry, but your audience is still growing. Where do you two see the podcast kind of going over the next couple of years? Like, are there any new topics or subjects or even potential guests that you'd like to highlight in the future?
I think the big thing for us is like we always want to be innovating and helping to develop the real estate industry. And so I like to think about concepts like, further systematization, further advancement of the customer service experience through technology. AI would be a big one in the real estate space, I think. And we've had incredible opportunities to use the podcast actually to help train AI to answer questions in real estate. So that would be a big one. The other thing I think is, in Canada, we have a housing crisis, and real estate investors are often demonized as contributors to that. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is how we can actually be a force for change or good against, facing the housing crisis in Canada. And so we want to play as much of a role in that as we possibly can, and to kind of shift the narrative, or at least expand the conversation and fully explore the dialogue towards how, Canada being late in its life cycle as a sort of emerged economy or developed economy like Europe. A lot of those countries are going towards low home ownership, high institutional ownership, high investment ownership, and they become what people refer to as renters economies. And we want to talk about what benefits and drawbacks come with that. It's a reallocation of capital away from the primary residence, which can be a good thing. It can allow people like you and I to invest in things that we care about rather than just our house. But it can also create opportunity for real estate investors, and understanding that role and discussing it on sort of a long-term horizon is kind of like one of the big underlying themes. And I think, where we see it going is really expanding those collaborative opportunities that we have in the industry. I've had opportunities, Nick, I haven't even mentioned this one to you, but from academia to connect with them on how to use the podcast to further expand from a research perspective, in theses, or connecting with students or whatever it is. So I think just like further partnership, further depth into the real estate industry. We know what our niche is. We're not going any wider than we already are, right? Like we already have done that with kind of like merch, meetups, and course. I think it's just how deep can we go with the silos that we've created now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you'd asked me 2 years ago if this was possible, I might have said yes, because again, eternal optimist. But even if you'd asked me a year ago when we started out, I'd still be in shock as to what we've been able to accomplish, and again, very, very humbling. So I'm very excited to see where it goes. I think the two main things we're focused on is continuing to educate and train the next generation of real estate investors and along with our other podcast investors in general, and truly making a difference. And we're able to do that through the community that we're building, right? Because Dan and I are just two people, but if we have, our audience is now growing to well over 60,000 downloads a month. So, the goal is as 100 a month as fast as possible. And if we can, even get half of those people out to events and start to give them what they need to succeed within the real estate space, and I think we can do some good and make some and have a meaningful impact.
I will say one last thing on that in regards to speakers that we might want to highlight. Like I've noticed that the last couple of elections were run on housing policy. Like the conversation for the last 3 elections, municipal, provincial, and federal, was all housing. And so one of the things that I think we'd like to do, like sort of understanding our role as part of the media now in this content creation space, is really exploring that political conversation, because I think, you know, most of our listeners are millennials, and our generation just isn't really exceptionally good at voting. It's a hard thing to do gracefully, because you really do have to integrate both sides to not alienate anyone, and also to really examine the full breadth of the conversation. But that really is something that we'd like to do, I think, to integrate political discussion, not even political discussion, but policy discussion. I think, like, how can we solve these problems in a meaningful way? That would really be a guest area that we'd like to explore.
That's exciting, you two. Honestly, just hearing about it, and knowing where you had started from, and now how this podcast has grown so much, I am just bubbling with pride. This is just so exciting. And I especially think too, you hinted on it a little bit, but you are now moving to being a source within the media for people, whether it is through academia or even through these political discussions that are very important, because people, of course, will vote within certain policies. And now having a more objective bird's eye view, because that's, as a journalist, you'd have to move towards that. So that's a very interesting position to be in. And I'm just excited. And I'm excited to see how that evolves and grows as well into its own little beast, in a sense. So I think, even though we have other questions, I think this is a great place for us to wrap. I'd love it if you two could share where our audience can find you at the end of this and learn a lot more about what you two are up to.
Of course, yeah. If they'd like, they can search the Canadian Real Estate Investor Podcast on Google, and it should come up just the website for the show, and you can choose a platform from there. It's available on every podcast platform. And then individually, my name's Daniel Foch, Foch, and Nick's name is Nick Hill. And you can usually Google my name, because it's kind of fringe name. Like the last name's just not exceptionally common. Nick's is a little more common, so he's harder to hunt down per se. He can give you all of his handles and stuff, but mine, if you Google me, usually it'll come up pretty easily.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm available on almost all platforms as my buddy Nick. So you add me and we're buddies. And then LinkedIn, we keep it professional. So I think I'm Nick, or I might even be Nicholas on there. We'll see. I can't remember.
Very professional.
Yeah, of course.
That's great. And now I'm guessing you two will be on Threads on Instagram too, which is the new Instagram, Twitter.
Yeah, and actually, while we were having this conversation, Threads passed Twitter in number of users, which is interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we've already registered on the owner side of things, myself too, for my businesses. So it's pretty interesting. But
yeah, I'm interested to see how that goes. I'm not sure. It'll either change the game, or it'll be a complete flop.
Yeah. It's kind of like Instagram. They love to just absorb what's popular in the moment. So I love that.
Yeah. The part that fascinates me is it's like Twitter, but without anonymous accounts, because Instagram doesn't have a lot of anonymous accounts. I don't know. It's probably it's a good thing and a bad thing. So, because I've noticed TikTok's a very genuine platform, because people can make an anonymous account very instantly, but it's also a very toxic platform because of that, right?
That too. Yeah. And same with Twitter. So
yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me for this fireside chat. And everybody who's watching, be sure to follow us here at Owner on all platforms to see more fireside chats like this one if you found it valuable. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Awesome.